The Russian Air Force is the third largest in the world. With over 1,000 airplanes, its key objective is protecting the enormous expanse of Russia. But despite all the efforts since the collapse of the Soviet Union, its forces still encounter numerous challenges. In this video, we will shed some light on the current situation and possible future of the Russian Air Force. For the details on today's Russian Air Force problems, there's a great book on World War II Soviet pilot experiences I found. This video is sponsored by Audible, and there's an offer for Binko viewers if you click the link below, but hear me out first. The Red Star Against the Swastika audiobook is an account of an Illusion 2 pilot. Everything from the details on the plane itself to personal experiences, becoming a pilot and performing over 90 sorties during the war. You really get the feel for just what the Soviets were fighting against. And it's available on Audible, an audio streaming subscription service. They've got classics, big new titles, fiction and non-fiction, podcasts, you name it. But what I like is that you basically get credit for one audiobook per month for free, and that's on top of the Audible Plus catalog of over 11,000 titles. Those you can stream absolutely for free. So visit audible.com/Binkov or text Binkov to 500 500 to start your 30-day trial. Anyway, in the 1990s and 2000s, the Russian Air Force shrunk dramatically, retiring around 10,000 airplanes. 10 years ago, its size steadied at a little over 1,000 aircraft, including bombers and naval aviation. Since many of these airplanes were built during the Cold War, there was an urgent need to modernize before planes started falling from the sky. In 2009, after Algeria refused the delivery of some MiG-29s, the Russian Air Force took them instead. A major push towards procurement of new planes began. 2014 was the apex of new acquisitions, with as many as 81 combat jets delivered that year. But then from 2016 onward, deliveries began to drop once again, down to only 19 combat planes in 2020. There have been other contracts for more aircraft, suggesting the current lull is temporary. Even so, it is doubtful the procurement rates will again attain 2014 levels. The Air Force ordered at least 20 Su-30 SM-2s, a modernized variant equipped with the same engines as the Su-35. It also ordered 30 additional Su-35s as well as at least 24 Su-34s. Most of these contracts stipulate deliveries by the year 2023. Meanwhile, MiG-35 procurement seems to have stalled. This combat jet underwent a protracted development. So far, only 6 serial airframes have been delivered. Old MiG-29s are being replaced with bigger Su-30s. The long-awaited Su-57 contract has also been signed. 76 planes have been ordered to be delivered by 2028. The Su-25, the venerable close air support plane, still lacks a clear successor. Despite rumors, the rest of the fleet will likely remain in use over the next 10 years or so. Just like their American counterpart, the A-10, Su-25 airframes have several more decades of life in them due to their sturdiness and mission profile. Likewise, relatively unburdened MiG-31s might have a few more decades in them as well. According to a 2020 statement by the General Director of the MiG Corporation, the eventual MiG-31 replacement will likely be based on its airframe. For the next several years, there should be around 30 combat planes of all types delivered to the Russian Air Force each year. However, with the production of the Su-57 ramping up, deliveries of the Su-35 will likely slow down. More orders of Su-34s also seem likely, but not in numbers eclipsing the remaining Cold War Su-24s. Will Russia alter the size of its Air Force in the next decade or so? That is hard to say. The inventory list shown is reasonably accurate. In this video, we will be focusing mainly on combat airplanes. Naval aviation is shown separately from the Air Force. Mind you, these lists omit planes primarily meant for training. For example, the UB variant of the MiG-29 lacks the radar and avionics to be an effective combat jet. The recon variant of the Su-24 is also shown separately. A few Su-57s and MiG-35s have also been delivered, but their numbers mean they have not had operational capability declared yet. Over the next decade or so, approximately 320 of these airplanes shown will be retired due to their age. so the planned production should suffice to replace all those aircraft. But some of those won't be replaced at all. Su-24MR recon planes will be replaced by reconnaissance pods carried by other airplanes. While this will affect the availability of these planes for combat roles to some degree, it is a reasonable compromise. The Su-33s may get replaced by additional MiG-29Ks, but considering the state of Russia's only aircraft carrier, this is hardly a priority. Russian bombers almost rival those of the United States. Considering the downsizing of tactical aviation after the Cold War, this shows just how critical bombers are for Russia. Russia's bombers, ICBM launchers, and nuclear missile launching submarines are part of its nuclear triad of delivery systems. The triad has not been downsized as much, and delivering nukes is the bomber's primary task. Tupolev 22M is an exception there. As a smaller supersonic plane with a more limited range, its chief task is tactical strikes. But before we talk about plane numbers as an issue for the Russian Air Force, let's talk about technology. After all, combat planes can't be a threat without proper subsystems and weapons. But even newly built Russian planes frequently adopt relatively outdated technology. The Su-30SM, which is the mainstay of the Russian modernization effort, is a mix of old and somewhat modern tech. Its radar and avionics are roughly 1990s level technology. It's a heavy plane with an airframe construction method stemming from the 1980s. Its engines are not much different from the original flanker engines, though updated for greater reliability. It's only in 2021 that the first examples of a new subvariant have started to appear. The Su-30SM-2 will strive to achieve greater compatibility with the Su-35, using much of its avionics, radar tech, and its more powerful engines. However, bringing up the entire Su-30 fleet to that standard may take at least half a decade or so. Su-35 isn't the cutting edge of technology either. It is a capable airframe due to its inherent maneuverability, size, and extensive range. However, its mostly passive electronically scanned radar is not as versatile as modern radars of similar size. The Su-34 is a plane designed in the Cold War. It too will get improved with more modern avionics. Detecting, tracking, and attacking ground targets remain critical tasks for any modern-day Air Force. Once again, the Russian Air Force seems to be lagging behind 20 years or so. Even newly built Su-34s still rely on an older generation of targeting systems, with a limited range and a narrow field of vision. Su-30SMs never really carried targeting pods. The Model T-220 may be the first targeting pod designed and built for the Russian Air Force. The only Russian combat jets observed with said pod were some Su-35s. Most key aircraft types seem to lack those. That will have to change over the next 5 years or so. All of that does show that Russia is still clinging to the old Soviet doctrine of ground-based firepower and relegates strike missions as secondary to control of the air. The lack of modern systems extends to weaponry as well. The vast majority of bombs used by Russian combat aircraft remain unguided. Sure, there are sat-nav-aided bomb delivery systems, but those require flying at relatively low altitudes, putting airplanes at risk. While standoff weapons are becoming a norm elsewhere, their numbers in the Russian Air Force remain limited. Russians have utilized satellite-guided bombs in Syria, but bomb numbers seem to be small. But there have been more advanced models since, meaning it is presumably only a matter of time before those enter service. The lack of modern weapons extends to air-to-air missiles as well. The majority of Russian planes seem to be armed with R-27 and R-73 variants, yet more designs stemming from the Cold War. Currently, the most advanced short-range missile in Russian use is the R-74M. While improving upon the original R-73 design, its multicolor seeker is still behind the imaging infrared seekers on other technologically superior missiles. It also seems to lack a data link and inertial navigation system. Those would allow it better target discrimination, more extensive reach, and wider off-bore shots. The next version of the missile should include all these and hopefully enter service alongside the Su-57. Russia never bought the original R-77 missile for active use. even though the manufacturer sold countless such missiles abroad. But they did buy its modernized variant, the R-77-1. It should be roughly comparable to some of the C-series AMRAAMs. Contract values equal roughly $1 billion, which with lower procurement costs in Russia might lead to 2,000 or 3,000 missiles ordered. Such numbers would still not fully match US stocks per available plane once they're all delivered. Russian tactical aviation might then have some 2.5 R-77s per plane, while the US Air Force has a little over 5 AMRAAMs per tactical plane. The US Navy and Air Force have, for example, received some 13,300 AMRAAMs so far since 1989, some of which have been used up. Russia is developing an even newer variant seen tested with the Su-57. Among other things, it will use conventional fins and allegedly an AESA radar seeker. When might those missiles proliferate in great numbers is anyone's guess though. It could be 2030 by the time they become the norm. The R-37M is a very long-reach missile. While initially carried by the modernized MiG-31s, it has recently been observed on Su-35s as well. Unlike the original variant stemming from the Cold War, the M version allegedly has decent capabilities against small and maneuverable targets. But the Russian Air Force is still behind when it comes to the application of new technology on a mass scale. For example, Russia has a single stealth plane in its fleet. To compare, 2% of the Chinese fleet are stealth planes, and almost 17% of the US fleet are stealth planes. When it comes to the active electronically scanned radars, the situation isn't any better. The Russian fleet has that same one plane with such radar. The Chinese have some 19% of their fleet equipped with such radars, and roughly half of the US fleet uses ESA radar tech. As if all those problems weren't enough, there's the crucial issue of pilots and training. After all, what use is the best plane in the world without a well-trained pilot? Many air forces, including the US one, are experiencing pilot shortages. Pilots can get better pay in the commercial sector. In 2020, the US Air Force was some 2,100 pilots short. Looking at their active duty force, they were probably around 850 pilots short. The overall fleet has some 5,100 pilot seats. For comparison, in 2016, the Russian Air Force was 1,300 pilots short. Their plane and helicopter fleet has a total of 4,300 pilot seats. So the Russian Air Force had a bigger shortage of pilots per seat. Mind you, all air forces strive to have even more pilots than seats. Not enough pilots means some planes in some situations are not available for missions, or the existing pilot pool is overworked, and in the long run, mission rates still suffer. In 2017, the Russian Air Force attempted to solve the problem by accepting women for pilot training, the first time since World War II. An even more critical issue is inadequate flight hours. Pilots require at least 30 to 50 flight hours per year just to retain basic non-combat flight skills. Flying 100 or so hours annually gives pilots some basic air combat or basic ground strike skills. Upward of 150 flight hours per year allows training for a variety of missions, like flying in a major task force or interacting with support platforms. Upward of 200 hours is desirable if a pilot is to be well-rounded in all sorts of missions, as most multi-role planes today require. This is a problem for most air forces. Even the US annual flight hour averages in 2017 and 2019 weren't that great. Advanced simulators may help with part of that training, but not even the Americans have been employing those in large numbers. When it comes to the Russian Air Force, the situation seems to be even worse. Here's what we know about Russian flight training hours. In 2012, some fighter pilots from the Kursk unit managed 150 flight hours. That marks the highest figure ever recorded. Because in 2018 the average pilot time in the air was down to about 100 hours, with the new graduates flying over 120 hours. That trend, however, got worse. The ministry said that in 2019 pilots received 90 hours of training per year on average, while recent graduates spent 110 hours in the air. Mind you, these figures may include transport aircraft hours, which are usually higher than the average. It would appear that since 2015 or so, progress has backtracked, With only 100 hours of flight training per year, Russian Air Force combat pilots probably aren't proficient at a wide variety of missions. Indeed, some second-hand reports claim in-flight refueling training is almost non-existent. To compensate for this, the Russian Air Force is likely instructing pilots for a narrow set of missions. Even though Su-30s and Su-35s are multi-role airplanes, it is plausible their pilots specialize in certain types of missions. This video won't examine all the details about the Russian Air Force. Topics like SAMs, UAVs, helicopters and support platforms are too broad, but it is telling that the Russian procurement problems extend to large platforms as well. The Ilyushin-76 dates back to the Soviet era. It serves as an AWACS plane, transport airplane and a refueling platform for the Russian Air Force. Development of the new Ilyushin-76 variant began in 2005. The prototype flew in 2012. The signed contract stipulated delivery of 39 airframes by the end of 2020. Flash forward to today, only 2 serial airframes have been delivered. Currently, the Russian Air Force is hoping to receive 27 airframes by 2028. It is questionable just how many of the 200 Ilyushin-76 transport planes are even flight-worthy. The number of AWACS airplanes has also shrunk considerably. Back in 2012, the Russian Air Force had 20 AWACS planes and 20 air tankers. Since then, the combat aircraft fleet didn't lose many planes, but the AWACS fleet was cut in half. The modernization effort seems to have stalled at just 5 airframes, even though the Air Force received the first plane 10 years ago. There is a new model of an AWACS plane in development. It also uses the Ilyushin-76 airframe and will supposedly enter the service in 2024. So, throughout this video we didn't list one problem, we listed many. But they all stem from one common problem: money, or the lack of it. Russia is investing quite a lot in its armed forces, but that isn't enough for the kind of military it wants to upkeep. Russia has a similar number of nukes as the US. Their military personnel figures, depending on how one counts the reserves, are 35 to 60% smaller. Its air force has 1/3 of the US plane numbers. Yet the Russian military spending is, even when purchasing power parity is used, almost 5 times lower than US military spending. One solution would be to cut down the overall numbers. Reducing numbers would allow for more modern equipment, but would compromise the coverage of Russia. The country is too vast to be covered by just several air bases. Overall, military spending dropped in the late 2010s. After reaching $70 billion in 2016, the budget later shrunk to $60 billion. Issues like the slow production of new planes and the lack of pilot training hours stem from these financial problems. Had the funding been there, the Su-57 project would probably have had more engineers working on it, testing new solutions more often, and the plane would be in service already. Regrettably, the financial woes of the Russian armed forces are a core issue that goes back decades. The Russian Air Force is doing the best it can with its resources. If allowed to shrink in size a bit, it could be even more efficient overall. Modern multi-role airplanes could perform a variety of missions more efficiently even if they are not as numerous. The Russian Air Force is aware of its problems and needs. The Su-57 design, preference of big planes over MiG-35s, lack of AWACS and tankers, possible flight training specialization, those are all structured to suit a defensive role. Designing a force for power projection over its borders would require even more money. Still, the future of the Russian Air Force isn't looking very bright. Their needs seem to overreach their budget. The incremental improvement of the force will continue in the coming decade. Whether that will be enough to shrink the capability gap with possible opponents in the coming decade is another matter. And remember, Binkov may talk about hypothetical wars, but only real peace can bring us all together.